Okay, let me welcome you to another episode of our IPN colloquium where we invite a young scholar and have a discussion on his or her work. So this week we have Sreejith. Sreejith teaches philosophy at Visyasagar University, West Bengal. His area of work mainly focuses on epistemology, particularly virtue epistemology. He is also interested in something strange like philosophy of psychiatry. So I'm not taking any more time, so let me invite Sreejith. So Sreejith, you can make the presentation for roughly 45 minutes. After that, we will have a discussion. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Shinod. Good morning, everyone. Um, it's a pleasure to be here and also a little embarrassing for me personally. Shinod was encouraging me to make a presentation in this network for a long time, but I was evading his request in various ways um, due to a few reasons. And one of them is that I'm unable to attend any of the IPN meetings. Probably I attended maybe a couple of meetings. And that is because in most of the days I'm not in home and I'm back in home on Saturday. And as there is also a small kid there, then after working whole week, again working on a Saturday morning could be a grave injustice, particularly from the eyes of a child, I thought. So for being ethical, I thought I should avoid attending this Saturday meeting. So that was so just to drop in for a presentation and then disappear looks quite um, odd, and therefore I thought I didn't have the courage to come and present. So anyway, so thank you, Srinod, for pushing me to come here and make a presentation. So this is not really a well worked out paper. This is probably a first draft of something that I am uh, trying to write for an ICPR project that I am undertaking. So discussion and particularly criticisms and comments would be of great help to me. Okay, so having said that, let me straight away go to the presentation. By the way, it reminds me of something interesting, that is uh, many advise that never start a presentation with an apology because it will instantly put the audience, off. But precisely that's what I did today, because maybe the attempt is not to impress anybody, but just to be honest uh, about the way things are. Okay, so I hope you can see my screen. Can you?
Yes, yes, it's clear.
Okay, one second. Not sure. Okay, yeah. So the paper's title is Testimonies Predicament, a critique of John Greco's defense of virtue epistemology. So, as we know, virtue epistemology is one of the recent developments in epistemology. It attempts to characterize knowledge in terms of primarily in terms of intellectual virtues. It has a parallel in ethics, namely virtue ethics, which attempts to characterize morality in terms of moral virtues. So this view hold that both action and belief can be grouped under the category of performances, and therefore they share their normative properties. A performance can be this is coming particularly from the view of Ernest Sosa. Uh, a performance can be evaluated uh, in three levels. One is that of the accuracy of the performance, that is, whether the performance has succeeded in attaining its goal. That's number one. And number two is whether the performance is a skilled one, a skillful one, an adroit one. And the third one is whether the success of the performance is because of the adroitness or the competence involved in the performance. So these are three levels of evaluation of a performance. For example, let's consider the case of an archer who shoots at a target. So if the arrow hits the target, you can say it's an accurate performance, it's successful, because that's the goal of the performance. The goal of the performance is to hit the target. And if the archer shoot the arrow skillfully, one can say this is also an adroit performance, another level of evaluation. And if the success of the performance is because of the competence involved, one would say this is also an apt performance. Let's say if while the archer is shooting the arrow, let's say one gust of wind take the arrow away from its path for a while, and another gust of wind counteracting the effect of the first wind take it back to its original path, and finally the arrow hits a target. In this case, one would say that the success of the archer is not because of his competence. So therefore, the performance wouldn't be counted as an apt performance. So when we say talk about the goal of the performance, uh, belief goal is to get it true, get it right. So when we believe, we don't want to. The goal of the belief is always to get the belief right. So when we talk about the goal, it need not be always intentional. Sometimes, for example, let's say somebody standing as a statue on the beach. Sometimes we see it on the beach. Somebody standing like a statue with color all over the body. So the person who is standing might be thinking about something else while doing that performance. But that doesn't. But still, it's a performance. So the renewed attention is not necessarily required for performance. Even a state can be a performance, therefore. So people like John Greco characterize um, knowledge as cases of belief where the truth of the belief is best explained by the intellectual abilities. So, in cases of knowledge, the truth of the belief can be credited to the agent. That's the way it is put it. So, it's a creditable success, and therefore, it is an achievement on part of the agent in that sense. And by achievement, it's not necessary that one has uh, attained something very difficult, or sometimes we mean in that way. It need not be that. It all that it means is that the success is particularly it's owed to the agent. That's all what it really means. And often the virtue epistemology is divided into two strands. One is virtue responsibilism, and the other one is virtue reliabilism. The virtue responsibility strand consider open-mindedness, intellectual curiosity, intellectual humility, conscientiousness, etc., as the paradigm cases of virtues, intellectual virtues. Uh, so all these are character traits basically. Whereas the reliabilist strand consider faculties, let's say perception, inference, introspection, memory, etc., as the paradigm cases of intellectual virtues. So the former basically uh, stress on the idea of moral virtues, which Aristotle uh, focuses on, whereas the latter uh, on the intellectual virtue. So this virtue epistemology project is often seen as a significant departure from the traditional uh, epistemological approach, where the attempt is primarily to provide individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions for knowledge. Ernest Sosa, for instance, believes that holds that the um, what he does in virtue epistemology is not to provide a conceptual analysis where you give individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions or a linguistic analysis. So rather, he believes that he is trying to characterize and provide a metaphysical analysis of knowledge, meaning what the thing, what is the thing called knowledge, meaning what is that thing or phenomena. So, giving an account of the very phenomenon of knowledge rather than the concept of knowledge. That's what I am doing. That's what Ernest Sosa maintains. Whereas people like Greco maintains that it's definitely not an attempt to provide a conceptual analysis, whereas where the attempt is only to highlight the more significant aspects of knowledge and thereby uh, uh, have a better understanding of what it is. So this project, as the way I understand, has certain dissatisfaction with the traditional epistemological project, and they believe that the attempt to provide necessary and sufficient conditions and the fourth condition, so on and so forth, has um, led us to an impasse where no more progress is really made, and the analyses that are coming up are not really shedding light on the very thing called what knowledge is. Also, it other criticisms such as it doesn't pay any attention to other important epistemic notions such as, let's say, wisdom and understanding, which were which are actually important notions. Okay, so with that sketchy account of what virtue epistemology is, I will straight away go to one criticism that has been posed against this account. So one of the compelling argument against virtue epistemology is that it is unable to account for knowledge from testimony. So this the following example given by Jennifer Lackey uh, make the point. So here is a case. Chicago visitor. Having just arrived at the train station in Chicago, Morris wishes to obtain, able to read properly there. Um, Morris wishes to obtain directions to Sears Tower. He looks around, approaches the first adult passerby that he sees, and asks how to get to his desired destination. The passerby, who happens to be a Chicago resident, who knows the city extraordinarily well, provides Morris with impeccable directions to the Sears Tower by telling him that it is located 2 blocks east of the train station. Morris unhesitatingly forms a corresponding true belief. So this is the case. So this is a case of testimonial knowledge. We all depend upon this kind of instances when we particularly go to an unfamiliar places. Um, let's imagine maybe for strengthening the example, one can add various conditions such as one might say, no, I don't ask to people anymore. I use Google Map. So one can twist the example and say that this Morris had a phone, but it was malfunctioning or it stopped working due to some reason, etc., etc. So we know that testimony is part and parcel of uh, a large part of our knowledge and what we believe. So, if an account of knowledge is unable to accommodate testimonial knowledge, it will be impoverished in significant ways. Um, if we were to discard testimony as a source of knowledge, um, the stock of knowledge that we have will be very, very limited indeed. So here, Jennifer Lackey's point is that Morris in this case knows, however, what explain his success, intellectual success, namely the truth of his belief, the correctness of his belief, is primarily because of the fact that the testifier is familiar with the city for a long time, and he has or she has communicated it properly to Morris, etc. So the success is largely owed to the competence of the testifier and not that of the agent, namely Morris. So, as we have seen, from the point of virtue epistemology, one has knowledge if the correctness of the belief or the truth of the belief can be um, is because of the competence of the agent or intellectual virtues of the agent, where the truth can be credited to the agent. So in this case, it doesn't seem so. It doesn't seem that it's the competence of the Morris uh, that explains his success. So Lucky's point is that it's the competence of the testifier which explains why Morris' belief is true. So, if that is the case, uh, Jennifer Lackey argues that it's not clear as to how virtue epistemology will um, respond to this situation. So, her point is that uh, uh, Morris' knowledge is unable to be explained from a virtue theoretical point of view. So this is the challenge that we are looking at for today's paper. So what I am doing in this paper today is, I should have probably said it in the outset. So what I am doing in this paper is that look at this response, look at this criticism. So Jennifer Lackey criticized that virtue epistemology enables to accommodate testimonial knowledge. And there is a response from John Greco, and I will be looking at John Greco's response and would argue that John Greco's response that he has made in two, three works basically doesn't succeed in addressing the problem. Okay. So, um, so, so Greco says as follows. Often, theories of testimonial knowledge are divided into two camps. On the first kind of theory, what is important for testimonial knowledge is that the source of testimony is in fact reliable, is actually reliable. That's what it matters. That's one view. On the second kind of theory, it's also important that the believer knows, or at least justifiably believes that the source is reliable. That is, so the first account says that testimony has to be in fact reliable. Second says that not only that the testimony is in fact reliable, the agent should also know that it's reliable. So these are two views, um, or at least from a virtue perspective. However, a third kind of theory comes into view. That's what Greco says. So the third view, Greco says, is that testimonial knowledge requires that the believer is a reliable receiver of testimony. Okay, so he says, so there are now third view. So first is the testifier is in fact reliable. Second is the agent knows that the testifier is reliable. So, and the third is that the third view, which is a virtue theoretic view according to Greco, is that it's not about the testifier, but about the agent, the receiver, and the receiver should be a reliable receiver of testimony. That's what really matters. That's what Greco says. So it's all about the receiver rather than about the testifier. That's what Greco maintains. So now what exactly the term reliable reception means is a question to be looked into. Um, it's um, not very clear. It's presented in a very sketchy fashion. Uh, so one might assume that reliably receiving testimony requires knowing or justifiably believing that the testifier is a reliable source of information. One might say. So if I had justification for believing that somebody is a reliable source of testimony, or if I have justification, then I will be a reliable source of a reliable receiver of testimony. That's what one might say. One might, or at least that's what I was thinking when I was reading it. Um, however, Greco doesn't accept this interpretation. This is not what Greco means for sure. So, what he means, it seems, that reliable reception means that we have some cognitive faculties that enable one to distinguish reliable source of testimony from unreliable ones. So, what he tries to do is basically like just like we have faculties of perception, just like we have faculties of, let's say, inference or memory. Similarly, we have a faculty for testimonial knowledge. Uh, that's the kind of turn he's making. So sorry, let me read what he says. So, one second. So what he says is that testimonial knowledge requires that the believer is a reliable receiver of testimony. That is, what is important is not so much that the testifier is reliable or that the believer knows that he is, but that the believer herself is reliable in the way that she receives and evaluates testimony. This will plausibly involve reliable capacities for discriminating reliable sources of testimony from unreliable sources. So, uh, seems to maintain that there are distinct capacities which will help us to distinguish reliable sources of testimony from unreliable sources of uh, testimony. So it might be assumed that the uh, capacity to distinguish reliable sources of testimony from unreliable ones necessitates that the agent possesses either knowledge or a justified belief regarding the reliability of the testifier. However, Greco does not endorse this view. Instead, he appears to maintain that an agent can exercise the ability to reliably discriminate between reliable and unreliable sources of testimony without possessing justified belief or knowledge about the testifier's reliability. So, to outline a possible virtue theoretic account of testimonial knowledge, Greco appears to foreground the notion of testimonial competence. So he doesn't use this word, but that's what it appears. Though he does not develop it in any detail, and he doesn't say what this capacity really is in any detail. So he seems to suggest that humans possess a distinct cognitive capacity for acquiring knowledge through testimony, analogous to the capacities underlying perceptual, inferential, and memorial knowledge. If this interpretation is correct, then receiving testimony involves the exercise of a specific epistemic faculty, one that enables the agent to acquire knowledge in a way comparable to other epistemic capacities, such as perception, memory, inference, etc. So that's what he seems to suggest. So, So on this view, just as perceptual knowledge is attributable to one's perceptual faculty, testimonial knowledge might similarly be credited to one's capacity for reliable testimonial uptake. So this capacity, which may be termed testimonial competence, would function by enabling an agent to accept reliable testimony and reject unreliable testimony without necessarily engaging in explicit reasoning. So if this interpretation aligns with Greco's position, then in cases of testimonial knowledge, the correctness or truth of an agent's belief can be sufficiently explained by the exercise of testimonial competence. So one would say in the case of Morris that we discussed, it's the testimonial competence of Morris that picked up the knowledge. So therefore, he is primarily credited for the success. That's what Greco is getting at. So consequently, testimonial competence would constitute the primary explanatory factor in accounting for the truth of the beliefs acquired through testimony. So, however, for this position to be adequately defended, the notion of testimonial competence requires further theoretical elaboration. Greco does not provide a detailed account of this capacity, leaving his position insufficiently developed as a response to Lackey's criticism. So, Srinod, how much time do I have? How much time more?
Maybe another 20 minutes. Is that okay?
Oh, excellent, excellent. I don't even, I maybe before that I will conclude.
Yeah.
Okay, so um, okay, so now Greco is trying to address the issue also by incorporating certain pragmatic features. So he says that, so basically Greco's draws an analogy between playing a soccer game and acquiring testimonial knowledge, asserting that this comparison illuminates how testimonial knowledge can be incorporated with a virtue epistemological within a virtue epistemological framework. So let's look at the example of soccer. So playing in a soccer game, Ted receives a brilliant, almost impossible pass, and then scores an easy goal as a result. In the case we are imagining, it is the athletic abilities of the passer that stands out. The pass was brilliant, its reception easy. Nevertheless, deserves credit for the goal. Whatever help Ted got, he is the one who put the ball into the net. Now that now that is not to say that the passer does not deserve credit for the goal, or even that he does not deserve more credit than Ted. It is to say, however, that Ted was involved in the right sort of way so as to get credit. So Greco is introducing something called the right way. So Ted is credited for the success in this case because he has involved in the right way in the process. So the question therefore is, what is the right way? So Greco emphasized that the key determinant in attributing credit to Ted is the right sort of involvement in the success. Consider a scenario in which Ted, inattentive to the game, fails to perceive the ball approaching him. A well-executed pass reaches him, but due to his lack of awareness, the ball inadvertently ricochets off his head and into the net, resulting in a goal. In this case, we would not attribute credit for the goal to Ted, despite his causal involvement in the play, in the goal. According to Greco, while Ted was technically involved in scoring, his involvement was not of the right sort. Consequently, from Greco's perspective, the goal cannot be credited to Ted sufficiently, as his contribution lacked the requisite form of competence. So, Greco highlights that involving in the right way is what determine whether the agent deserves credit for the success or not. That's the highlight. So, credit for success gained in cooperation with others is not swamped by the able performance of others. It's not even swamped by the outstanding performances of others. So long as one's own efforts and abilities are appropriately involved, one deserves credit for the success in question. So, Greco's underlying intuition in this argument is that the ascription of knowledge serves the function of identifying a reliable source of information. The pragmatic aspects comes into picture. So according to Greco, the agent's cognitive abilities in cases of testimonial knowledge constitute the right sort of involvement because they fulfill a crucial epistemic function, the capacity to identify reliable source of information. So this ability satisfies the requirements of practical reasoning in the epistemic domain, ensuring that the agent themselves can be regarded as a reliable informant. So consequently, Greco argues that the truth of the belief acquired through, um, um, let's say, testimony or other source for that matter, is properly credited to the agent's own intellectual virtues or cognitive abilities rather than, sorry, this is only case of testimony, uh, virtues of the cognitive abilities rather than being solely attributable to the expertise of the testifier. Because if somebody has received knowledge through testimony, that person can act as a reliable source of information. So that pragmatic feature ensures that the person has knowledge. That's the so this pragmatic element is what is key in determining whether the agent's involvement is of the right sort or not, and thereby whether it is a case of knowledge or not. That's the position of Greco. So now, for the remaining part, I will um, point out some of the difficulties which Greco's response has. So that's the last part of the paper. So it should take another 10 minutes or so, and then um, I can stop. So, so the difficulties with Greco's response. It remains unclear whether Greco's approach preserves the core commitments of virtue epistemology. That is, the explanatory salience emphasized in virtue epistemology, concerns the role of intellectual virtues or abilities in explaining how an agent arrives at a true belief rather than a false one. The central idea is that the truth of a belief can be attributable to the exercise of the agent's intellectual virtue or epistemic competence. In contrast, Greco's account, which rests on the conception of explanatory salience, appears to diverge from this traditional understanding. As we have seen, he argues that the intellectual abilities of an agent who acquires testimonial knowledge are significant primarily because they are they enable the agent to be recognized as a reliable source of information. So Greco argues that if an agent possesses the ability to properly receive testimony, in a manner that establishes them as a reliable informant, their intellectual abilities fulfill the purpose of practical reasoning. As a result, the agent can be credited with the truth of the belief acquired through testimony. So he appears to maintain that being a reliable source of information is necessary for knowledge. Uh, for knowledge. So, however, um, virtue epistemology traditionally holds that knowledge is present when the truth of a belief can be sufficiently attributable to the agent's intellectual abilities. So it seems that this view does not maintain that one must be a reliable source of information. So it would seem that to have knowledge, one need not be a reliable source of information. So to make this point clear, I provide a counter example. So let's look at this example. So this case shows that being a reliable source of information is probably not necessary for knowing. So consider a scenario in which Mithali's commitment, sorry, Mithali's communicative faculties are severely impaired. While she intends to convey specific information, her speech consistently diverges, producing arbitrary and unpredictable errors with no discernible patterns. Despite this communicative deficiency, Mithali retains full linguistic comprehension, processes spoken and written information accurately, and effectively retains and recalls them. Her cognitive faculties, aside from her impaired verbal expression, function normally. So the point here is that uh, under these conditions, Mithali can acquire knowledge. However, due to her unreliable communicative system, she fails to qualify as a reliable source of information. So this case illustrates that an individual may possess knowledge without necessarily being a reliable informant, challenging the criteria which John Greco introduces for knowledge. So, from the perspective of virtue epistemology, it's clear that Mithali possesses knowledge, as a true belief can be attributed to the exercise of her intellectual abilities or intellectual virtues or competence, whatever you may call. So, however, under the additional requirement which Greco proposes, Mithali doesn't know, and uh, that doesn't seem right. So, so therefore, one is tempted to say that Greco's account results in the exclusion of genuine instances of knowledge. Also, we can consider cases such as, this is a case which we often discuss in epistemology, that of a pathological liar. There are people who lie without any obvious reasons in a pathological fashion about anything. So, a pathological liar uh, cannot function as a reliable source of information. He or she is a clear case of a very unreliable source of information. However, the pathological liar perceive things properly, correctly, reasons properly, so comprehend language, written and verbal properly. So he or she has the knowledge. It's only that she doesn't share it with others. So the so again, this case would show that being a reliable source of information perhaps is not required for knowing. Okay, so another difficulty with Greco's account is that um, the virtue epistemological account holds that knowledge can be and should be characterized primarily uh, in terms of the intellectual virtues. However, the additional condition which Greco introduces, namely that of being a reliable source of information, the pragmatic condition, is not virtue theoretic in nature. Therefore, the account he comes up with is not a purely virtue theoretic account of knowledge. At best, it can be called as a modest account of virtue epistemology. So, with that, I will conclude. So, what I have done so far is that this paper highlights a significant challenge facing virtue epistemology, that is, its apparent inability to account for testimonial knowledge. It critically examines John Greco's proposed response, arguing that his solution is problematic. Specifically, it contends that Greco's approach lacks a genuinely virtue theoretic foundation and, as a result, failed to preserve the integrity of virtue epistemology. Furthermore, the paper challenges Greco's introduction of the pragmatic condition, namely the requirement that the testifier be a reliable source of information. Uh, okay, so with that, I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sreejith. Now let me now invite responses. So please use the raise hand option so we can have a orderly responses. Disha, please go ahead.
Good morning. Am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah,
Okay. Thank you, Professor, for the talk. It was very nice, a very lucid presentation. My question perhaps digresses a bit from the debate that you were talking about, but it still concerns largely epistemology of testimony. So I think because Greco is talking about discriminating reliable and unreliable sources of information, I think it's worth inquiring about what that standard threshold is on the basis of which we undertake this enterprise of discriminating, like who is reliable and who is unreliable. And I think it's a very pertinent concern, for example, in feminist epistemology, and in of course in other debates of epistemology of testimony. So this question that who do we trust? Because our descriptions of credibility are further dependent on our judgments of other people's competence and sincerity and their trustworthiness, which in a social world can be, and it's often tainted by biases and prejudices. So how do you think that this concern can be accommodated in your paper, or in epistemology of testimony? Yeah.
yeah. Thank you for that observation. I think it's very important to characterize the details of the term reliable source of information. At least in the works that I have referred, John Greco doesn't elaborate on that. He just keep it as a basic notion. And usually, as you know, as we all know very well, that usually one of the ways in which a reliable source of information or reliability is characterized as a source of knowledge will be reliable if that source provides us a knowledge or true belief more often than not. That's the way it is often characterized. But then again, one has to pinpoint, like you said, what is more often than not mean. So how much, what should be the threshold, as you put it? And yeah, it is true that given the kind of biases and prejudice that are there, it's important. And um, such biases and prejudices also result in the various kinds of epistemic injustices, as Miranda Fricker talks about. Uh, so this is a very important uh, uh, um, point indeed. Uh, but for my purpose, I am uh, not really for this paper. I'm not really required to uh, work out the details of what reliable reception, what reliable source of information mean, because I'm rejecting that condition uh, as a requirement for knowledge, since I'm criticizing the response of Greco. So uh, luckily, I don't need to develop that for this paper, but nonetheless, I agree that it's very important to work out that notion for Greco if he wants to provide his notion of his account of knowledge based on that particular concept.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, Varun?
Am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I can hear you.
Hey, hi
Hi.
Sreejith.
Hey,
Lovely
hi.
to meet you again, and
Thank
thank you for presenting your paper. Very new for me in the sense the virtue epistemology, and your paper helped me to at least get some idea on what is happening with all of this. Probably I will start with the clarificatory question. The clarification that I want here is, say, for example, Greco is, I mean, largely in virtue epistemology and in epistemology, at what point the demarcation of testimonial knowledge stands? What is the demarcation? Why I'm asking this is because if I say rely on someone telling me some information, I get that information. But after that, I start processing it in the sense that, like, say, can I trust him? Is it reliable? Do the whole process of reliability. And say one way or the other, if we are not working with simplistic examples, but working with, like, say, actual um, like say disciplinary knowledge, like say for example you are an expert in virtue epistemology, I'm listening to you and you are my testimony in that sense, and I'm trying to think through it, and at a one particular point of time it's not just that you become the testimonial source, but after that I start rationalizing it, reasoning it out, which is the whole process of reliability doing and all of those things, testing your reliability, where it slowly starts moving towards rational source of knowledge, right? It's no more just testimonial knowledge. So I just wanted to ask this simple clarification because I was not able to think through it. So probably I thought, let me first clarify that because the subsequent question that I'm asking relies on it. That's why.
Thank you. Thank you, Varun. Yeah, pleasure to meet you as well. Thanks also because it's a very difficult question, first of all.
Uh,
And it is a debate within the testimony of within the epistemology of testimony, which is that what exactly is the status of testimonial knowledge. So there
mm,
are there are some who believes that uh, like you seem to agree that testimony, when we accept somebody's testimonial knowledge, we simply take their words as an evidence and we make some kind of an inference from what they say. For example, if when somebody says something, uh, either we will ask the question whether this person has always been reliable in the past. Did I get the right information from this person in the past? So probabilistically, I have some justification in believing in what he says. Therefore, I will believe him. I will trust him. But my justification here is uh, largely inferential. So therefore, these people would say that actually there is nothing called testimony as a separate category of a source of knowledge. It's can be reduced to inference. So this is the reductionism argument in the epistemology of testimony. And some people, this is local reductionism. The global reductionists would say that no, 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 you don't have to look each and every person's reliability in the past, etc. All you need to see is that whether these kind of people, whether whether I had got true information from these kind of people in the past, let's say traffic police or institutional setup or people who are having certain kind of body language, whatever it may be. So here I'm using some kind of inferential procedure here. I'm inferring from all those past information to infer whether this is likely to be a reliable source of information. So here again, the global reductionists, they would say that, look, but it's not really a testimonial knowledge. This is nothing but inferential knowledge. So there's nothing called a separate category called a testimonial knowledge. So there's no separate category. There's nothing called testimonial knowledge as a separate category. However, one difficulty which many people points out is that, look, it doesn't, this account doesn't do justice to our phenomenology of believing. Phenomenology in the sense that the way we actually process our belief. So when I when I go out somewhere and ask for direction, when somebody tells me this and so on, I don't involve in this kind of a reasoning process. Usually, one might say. So therefore, it is not intuitive to the actual process of belief formation, one might say. But then the argument back is that no, 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 you don't even realize that you're doing because your reasoning is so fast and quick, you don't realize that you're doing it, one might say. So but the other account is to say that, see, we don't do this kind of inferences unless some counterexamples pops up. Okay, our default mode is to trust people, and trust others, but we begin to doubt if there are what you call as potential defeaters. So if there are certain symptoms of indications of it being false pops up, then I will start doing my reasoning. So if it doesn't happen, normally I will believe, and it's a pretty safe way to form belief. So this is the non-reductionist view, which says that forming belief is almost like perception. You just hear it and you believe it. You see it, you believe it, but you start doubting it if something messy is happening there. So perception gives us correct belief most of the time, but it deceives us at times. So same is the case with testimony. So the way we process this is almost on par with perceptual knowledge. So they would say, therefore, testimony is indeed a separate category of knowledge. So they are called basically, and they are called non-reductionist. So this is largely but it's very interesting that you immediately took a inferentialist to the stand, but that is a very big debate, and literature is there in epistemology of testimony. Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, because I was thinking that, like, say, now invoking reliability conditions for testimony invariably demands us into look into this aspect. I mean, like, say, probably, I mean, just to take further what you pointed out, how would virtue epistemology argument would proceed if we consider that testimonial source of knowledge is largely inferential source of knowledge? Then working out the virtue epistemology becomes much more coherent and robust, because now it is completely on the inferential side. And we know at the inferential side that we have a lot of reliability conditions and everything. And then we can tell that, like, say, the person has actually achieved something, because it's not just merely what you say, believing someone else. Then we have to see, the thing is, the problem also, I think, is happening here, probably because we are all working with different examples. I mean, like the example that you pointed out of Greco, or I don't know, Lackey, probably, I mean, like of the Chicago map. I think it's a everyday common example, and I'm not denying that it is not a testimonial, good example for testimonial knowledge, this one. But also we have to now start considering, because towards as Greco develops his argument, suddenly some places, I believe here you hearing or you mentioning Greco saying or you mentioning expert, something like that. There is we can consider this person being an expert in Chicago's road information, which the new person is not. And that's why I would trust that person. Now, suddenly, why I'm saying this is because if we shift the example from this everyday common things to complicated cases like, say, for example, I trusting a doctor, I trusting a scientist, I trusting you in that sense. You being an expert in virtue epistemology, right? I mean, like, and I'm also part of that community of scholars, but now I'm working in something else in that sense. In all of this, when we are talking about this kind of cases, it's difficult for me to just rely on testimony. I mean, like, I have to do a lot of other things when I'm listening to you and thinking through it, right? So what if now talking about these cases, the reliability conditions require some expert knowledge, which is weighed in a very different way than I asking the auto rickshaw driver. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, you're helping me out in this regard. That is, what you're saying is that if you take an inferentialist point of view, that is, if you believe that knowledge from testimony is actually can be reduced to inferential knowledge, then it's a lot easier for virtue epistemologists to respond. So they can easily say that, yes, there is no doubt your reasoning capacity is your capacity, and you are the truth of your belief is because of your reasoning. So so you have knowledge, and there is no difficulty. Therefore, the testimonial cases doesn't pose any threat at all. Right. So that is the quickest response. So you're right. One can respond much more convincingly and much more quickly if one were to support an inferentialist position. But I think that is fair. But I think also the virtue epistemologist has to respond. Can they respond to this criticism? If one were to, for the argument's sake, if one were to support non-reductionism regarding testimony, can they support? So for the sake of argument, they have to consider that option and respond, I believe. Otherwise, one can close the chapter much more quickly and say that, look, I don't think that testimony is non-inferential. It is nothing but inference. So therefore, I have a response. Here it is, end of the story. So that will be one response. But I think that will not convince those people who believe that testimony cannot be reduced to inferential knowledge. So I think for a virtue epistemologist, it's important to convince them as well. So they have to say that, okay, for the sake of argument, let's consider that non-reductionism regarding testimony is true. Then can I respond? So I think it's important to ask that question. And your second part of your comment is that, yes, testimonial knowledge is intimately related to expert knowledge. For example, scientific knowledge, medical knowledge, which are very important areas. And it gets actually a bit complicated when you go to that area. That's why most these epistemologists prefer to take the day-to-day cases, as you rightly pointed out. But it's nonetheless a very important area, expert knowledge. But still, I think people like Jennifer Lackey would say uh, that even in those kind of cases, of course, let's say you uh, let's say, since you mentioned the case of a doctor, and I'm interested very much in psychiatry. Let's suppose that I go to a psychiatrist and he tells me that this is the diagnosis for you and you should follow this and this medications. So now the question is, um, how do I know his reliability, etc., etc. So your point is that, of course, I will do a lot of checking. What is his reliability? And also I will Google the medication he has given, and I will Google the symptoms of, let's say I have generalized anxiety disorder. I will, yeah, please.
I was here pointing out how the peers play a very different role. I'm just saying a psychiatrist listening to another psychiatrist proposing something. Of course, it's a testimony. You have done a new research. I am also a psychiatrist. I mean, that is what is the whole peer review is about, right? Now, the peer
Right.
review relies on testimony, but the reliability conditions are far higher at stake there. And it's much more rigorous, more elaborate things are put into place rather than
Okay.
I immediately believing you. That was the example I was trying to point out.
Oh, right, right. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I believe that Lackey's example has a weakness in the sense that she said that Morris unhesitatingly believed, and
Correct.
I think that's a problem in the way she has characterized the case. I think that brings certain weaknesses, but I believe that one can refine her example and say that it need not be the case. So, for example, even it's a peer case, me as a psychiatrist and taking somebody else's view as a testimony. Suppose he has certain clinical observations and researches, and he has certain findings. Of course, before believing him or her, I will do certain kind of preliminary, checkups, and also I will see whether it cohere with my previous beliefs, my other set of beliefs, etc., etc. But still, maybe Lackey can say that still I get this true belief largely because of his competence. He is the one who worked hard and systematically made these inferences, all these findings, etc. So it's largely because of this person's competence. Therefore, it's primarily credited to him. Uh, one might say. So even if she drops that immediately believing aspect, maybe she can still hold the larger point that she's trying to hold. I believe. I mean, it's difficult, but
Yeah.
but it's very important. This expert knowledge. Maybe I should try to incorporate that in some way to this paper, because it is true that always mentioning the day-to-day simple cases can oversimplify the issue.
Yeah. Srinath, can I just give a follow-up comment? Is it fine, or do you think I'm taking too much
It's
time?
okay. We have 30 more minutes. It's
Yeah,
just-
yeah. Srijit, I mean, why I was trying to point out, and sorry, Lalita and Ashish, I know you guys are in the queue. I'm just want to point this out. Srijit, what is also happening here is that, like, say, I think another example that you mentioned of Greco pointing out a football case where pass being given to the person who scores it. Now, why I'm saying this is because actually how it works in the kind of knowledge production in that sense is because, like, say, you give a particular paper presentation, like say this testimonial presentation. And let's say I'm also working on testimonial knowledge, virtue epistemology, and all. And I take your criticism and I develop on it and present a new position and all of those things. Now, of course, without your criticism coming into place, I wouldn't have given my criticism and all of those things, and I wouldn't have built it up and all of those. Now, the question is how much credit you get for building that credit. All of this is there. What I'm trying to point out is that, like, say, the larger thrust for me here is coming from, of course, philosophy of science, where um, when they talk about reliability, there is a detailed discussion on reliability conditions. In the sense, and I thought that might be of help here, in the sense that, like, say, if you're doing experiment, what are the reliability conditions for that experiment? Now, the experimental group, the experimentalists have to do has to provide a lot of reliability conditions of why the experimental results are reliable in that sense. Now, they might have tested, like, say, 3 or 4 conditions and all of those things to say that this data is reliable and it's not just being produced as a noise of the machine. Other set of groups of experimental groups will produce another set of detailed results about probably other set of referential conditions, reliability conditions. Now, why it becomes interesting is that no single group, because of its experimental setup, cannot test all reliability conditions for that matter. And that's how the peer knowledge production happens. Experimental group A produces certain things, group B produces certain things, and everything. This feels to me, if we now go back to the simple example of a football passer and goaler. Now, the passer also has to have a lot of reliability conditions that, okay, the goaler is coming there. If I give it at this particular point of time, he may be able to convert it, knowing my experience about with this guy. And the goaler is also expecting that this passer, the midfielder, will give it to me. I mean, all of that reliability conditions are working, and that only when this thing clicks, it happens. What I'm saying through all of this is that, like, if we now go from, and this adds to your conversation, in fact, Greco is weak in his position because he converts all of this into as a cognitive function. And that's an easy hand waving way of accounting for everything. I mean, I have a model for perceiving art, thinking, intuition for everything can be converted to a cognitive module in that sense. But what it is, what all the conditions that this cognitive state or function does is the hard part. And I think that is what actually you're doing here, fleshing it out, the conditions and all of those things. Greco in that sense is weak, but now if you can go ahead and show how reliability conditions are executed by each testimonial listener and also the testimonial giver in that sense. Oh, I know this person is relying on my information. I also have to present in a particular way, right? And that is where I think your last example comes into play, where, like, say, she has the knowledge, but mightily cannot articulate it. I think all of this is very important here. So you have to probably flesh out the reliability conditions there.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Varun. So that
Yeah,
was
thanks.
so.
Thank you.
Ashish is still there?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sreejith. I'm a bit novice in this branch of philosophy, but my questions is very basic. Few of the questions have been adhered by Varun, so I'm thankful to him. So my question is, like, virtue epistemology is very close to the traditional epistemology, where it talks about the individual doxatic agent. It doesn't talk about, and people who use testimony as a source of knowledge, they use external factor. They are externalist in a way, and virtue epistemologies are internalist in a way. So why do Greco goes to this length to talk about testimony as a source of information when he himself comes from an internalist epistemological position, as in, like, and of course, like how Disha asked this question, like how can we rely on like testimony as a source of knowledge? And so my question is again not about how can we rely on testimony as a source of knowledge. That's a that you have answered. There are a lot of other debates which are still going on, which is not been finalized. But my question is, why do Greco goes to a length and try to incorporate testimony when his position is more of an internalist, not as an externalist, like an doxatic agent forming a belief or a knowledge from an external source or from others, like from testimony? So why do Greco goes to that length? And all the examples that Lackey and Greco suggest are very, the evidence are very empirical, as in the facts are empirical, like proved through empirical facts, as in someone reaches to certain destination or some goals have been passed and goals have been scored. But what about logical facts, and what about normative facts, like how to justify testimonial as a source of knowledge, and in reference to justification as normative and logical? So, yeah, thank you. Hope I'm been clear.
Yeah, thank you. I think there is a lot of things on the table. The first that you're asking is about the internalism, externalism aspect. Um, it is true that virtue epistemology is very close to traditional epistemology in one sense, that is, uh, uh, it is individualistic. That is, it's very individual centric, and that has been a criticism that particularly from the social epistemology quarter. But is it internalistic? I have a feeling that one can understand virtue epistemology. I'm not fully sure that virtue epistemology can be understood in externalistic fashion. Externalism in the following sense that um, when you, for example, as I understand it, internalism would maintain that if you have knowledge and when you have justification, it's accessible to you. You know, the justificatory factors are accessible to you. In your mind. Uh, but I think virtue epistemologists would say that as long as, let's say, your faculties, as long as your faculties have um, operated in a reliabilist fashion, and the success of your belief can be indeed credited to those faculties, you have knowledge. It's not necessary that the agent has to have a grasp of it. So from in that point of view, it would seem like externalism. That's what I thought. Um, so so therefore, so the second question is why would Greco? Sorry, yeah, do you agree with that? I mean, is it how you understand internalism, externalism?
Uh, uh, I'm not sure.
Okay, okay,
uh,
okay.
but
Okay, I mean, this is as far as I understand, this is the traditional way in which internalism, externalism debate is characterized in epistemology, that you are an internalist if you maintain that to have knowledge, let's say the justificatory aspect, you have to have an access in your mind that these factors justifies your belief. But you're an externalist if you don't stress on that condition. You would simply say that you are justified if actually it is produced, let's say, reliabilism through a reliable process. You don't know it actually. You don't have access to that details. So from that point of view, virtue epistemology looks like an externalist project to me. And the other portion. Sorry, can you please elaborate? I'm not very sure. The second portion, can you briefly, what
yeah,
you?
as in my question was in reference to like the internalist doesn't accept
Mm,
testimony as a source of knowledge because it's from others. It's like not it's kind of an interpersonal. It's not, they accept perception or inference and memory as in like their source of knowledge. And if Greco is an virtue epistemologist and if he's an internalist which doesn't accept the source testimony as a source of knowledge, then why he goes to this length to defend, like bring in a pragmatic aspect to it? Like that was the first question, as in a way. And the second was like all the examples have been taken in social epistemology, or like how Greco takes it, are related to evidence based on empirical facts. But what about yeah, normative and logical?
So Greco's um, well, I'm not sure. But I don't think that Greco's internalist, externalist. Sorry, internalist. I believe that he is more of an externalist in the sense that, in this sense, that I pointed out. Uh, but I believe so. Your question is how is as a virtue epistemologist, how is he doing all those things? So my position was yes. By doing that, his account ended up being not a proper virtue epistemological account. That was my observation. So the account he provides now is not fully virtue theoretic uh, in spirit, but I believe it's not because of the internalism externalism issue, but because of the issue that the pragmatics that he is incorporating is not virtue theoretic. uh, so however, he might say that, okay, I'm not a pure virtue theoretic person, but my account is a modest virtue theoretic account. So now regarding this mathematical knowledge, normative knowledge, so I think one might say, I haven't thought about it actually. Uh, uh, One might say that, so according to virtue epistemology, knowledge is a case where the truth of your belief, the accuracy of the belief, is because of your um, um, uh, competence, the competence that you exercise, etc. So in mathematical knowledge, you get mathematical knowledge, a piece of mathematical knowledge, if the belief that you have is uh, uh, correct, and it can be said that it's because of the correctness of your belief is because of the exercise of your competence. So why would that be a problem? Is not clear immediately to me.
My question was in reference to testimony as a source of knowledge. When testimony is a source of knowledge, the example presented can be partly justified when it comes to empirical facts or empirical evidence. But what about normative or logical evidence? Like how can testimony be taken as a source of knowledge in that sense? But
okay, in those cases, okay, right. Yeah, so the question is whether we can know mathematical truths or normative truths from the testimony of others. That's what you're asking, right? Testimony in the case of mathematical knowledge. Yeah, it's interesting. And a virtue epistemologist, has to say, I think if it's a testimony from somebody that there's such and such, well, let's say some theorem in mathematics or some mathematical truths, and it's said by a teacher who's an expert, etc. It will be a case of knowledge if the um, if the truth of the belief is primarily because of the agent's competence. So yeah, so but okay, so the question is whether testimony in whether virtue epistemology can accommodate testimonial knowledge in the case of mathematical knowledge, right? Yeah, I think I have to think about it probably. Yeah. Do you have any take on it? Do you have any opinion?
Unfortunately, I'm not an ardent supporter.
Okay. But thanks. But thank you very much. I have not thought about this. I have always been thinking about empirical knowledge, as you pointed out. Yes, mathematical knowledge issue I didn't think about. Yeah, I should probably. Thank you, Ashish.
Yeah, maybe just so maybe what is taken with testimony is now too large. It's not very clear whether you consider a classroom scenario or it's an instance of testimonial knowledge. Where I teach philosophy of science, most often I am the expert in the class if the students are doing it for the first time. So would that be a testimonial case? From there to something that Varun has been pushing, expert peer group engagement to say football coaching. So now what is not testimonial knowledge would become paramount here. I'm just, so let me go back to Lalitha. Super chance.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. It is, can I just start with a little emotive note? It's been really amazing to attend this talk. Thank you, Sreejith. Finally, I got the time to attend one of these, presentations. I've been trying for like such a long time, and yeah, I mean, it's nice to have that platform. I really like the discussion that is going on for a while now, and it's nice to see you, Shinod. Been a long time, and thanks, Varun. I mean, it's really nice. I mean, I'm just feeling very happy that we have this platform and how we, a lot of concerns that were discussed so far. Srijit, now coming back to the presentation. Um, so I am also the comments that I'm going to make are probably, I mean, they're dependent. They are based upon my rudimentary understanding of epistemology. I'm quite new to the area, but a lot of these things have been discussed in most of what I had the intuitive understanding of, also about other things, the logical correlations that we have in thinking about these questions. Varun highlighted and connected a lot of those things, but I am hoping, so the primary motivation for me to speak is probably some of what I can say might help you also to, with respect to your paper. And some of the things that have come up in the discussions are also, probably create a pathway for a next paper probably. Okay, so the first thing that it's very basic again, and I feel and think both at the same time that it might be helpful to focus on this aspect of truth versus justification. Now, this hasn't come out explicitly in our discussion so far, but I think the emphasis has been so far in, so I'm just traditional analysis, justification, truth, belief. The focus so far has been on truth and belief, but I think what is going on here is largely a concern of justification, not about truth. And if we explicitly shift the focus from truth condition to justification condition, a lot of this starts to make sense. A lot of the comments also that we've had. So let's say the example of experts, right? The examples of to what extent the first example that Lackey provides of who was the guy, Morris believing. So whether it is true that the belief that that he has about the directions is true belief or not. I mean, of course, it has to be true belief if it is true at all, but it is more about the justification that Morris has in believing the passerby. Now, that is the, like, rather a basic concern, to shift from the truth claim to justification condition. Finally, I think it seems that the concern about reliability and how I have, like, just because I had the advantage of listening to everything that has been going on so far, it seems that the reliability condition, which is the final aspect of Greco's account also, that this is how we should understand in with respect to testimonial justice. What does it mean to have knowledge? What is the role played? What is the role that is being played by the listener's capacity? So there is this epistemic capacity that the listener has. So a lot of the work, and I think this will strengthen your argument also, like, quite a bit, when you develop the account of this epistemic capacity. And when you say that the criticism that you have against on Greco's account is that, one is that he's not developing that to a certain extent, but I think regardless of whether Greco develops that account or not about the epistemic capacity, what that capacity would entail and so on, I think it is important to just highlight how that epistemic capacity is an important aspect. And I think there probably you it would be helpful to take Greco's account even further and expanding on it. I'm not suggesting that you do that in this paper, but for the purposes of incorporating all of these, like a lot of these comments that have been raised, because this ties with these aspects of reliability of, let's say, an expert. And it is an important question because it is connected with a lot of these debates. Let's say, so, okay, very quickly, this is, you've mentioned in responding to Disha's question also, the concern about hermeneutical injustice. That I think was her primary concern as well. Now, it seems that it is actually a virtue epistemological account that Greco is providing. So I would, now again, this is all on the basis of your talk, which very clear. And if that everything that you've said is true on Greco's account, I think it is, I would say it is not a model, like not really a modest theoretical virtue, theoretical account, but rather a very important one, because it is connected with, let's say, the concern of hermeneutical justice. And one of the virtues that, as you mentioned, Fricker, so I just thought that, okay, well, Fricker talks about the virtue of hermeneutical justice. So when we say that there is this virtue of hermeneutical justice, it is largely on part of the listener. So the listener has to exercise their capacity of judgment in order to give the speaker that space, in order to accommodate the previous marginalization. Now, I hope I'm making sense. I'm just going on and on, connecting, like saying all of these things.
Sure.
But I'm trying to say how a lot of this will be strengthened by focusing on developing Greco's. So Greco is probably not quite missing the mark here, but needs to go deeper in that direction. And yeah, and then it will also connect the other aspects about the experts and the reliability of the experts, uh, which and just a side note, which also I think what Ashish was saying and Shino then added to that, I think those things will come up really nice. It's not that difficult to, I think, for the purposes of this initial inquiry, it's not that difficult to incorporate, let's say, the mathematical proofs and other kinds of expert knowledge, normative, or the question of, morality, on and account that. And those questions which are not largely empirically testifiable form a large part of testimonial, epistemology. So I think it is already there in your understanding. It just has, like, it's, yeah, it has to just come out more explicitly. Okay, and there was one minor comment about this is, I think, my own mind playing some games, because it, thanks to the discussion and the presentation, I was wondering also how, probably a good idea to play with some Gettier example as well, a Gettier form of example, um, if the concern is about justification. But it seems if we focus the condition of, if we shift to the condition of truth, then Gettier examples become interesting, but not so much for the justification condition. And eventually, when we do all of this, focusing on the reliability aspect and this epistemic capacity to judge, it will also probably consider the Mitali example that you gave. It is, then it is the virtue of the listener. It is by virtue of the listener's capacities that some testimonial knowledge would count as knowledge. Um, yeah, and then in that window, the spectrum of justification. So what we are trying to do, let's say, in case of the peer review, in case of this exchange that we have, in case of speaking to an expert, we are trying to gather more and more justification. So some justifications might be weaker, some might be stronger. I think I should stop there. I think I've like kind of hopefully not tried to connect things, but I hope I have not confused you further.
No,
Okay,
no.
I will
Thank
stop there.
you
Thank
very
you.
thank you very much. It's a pleasure to listen to criticisms and comments. As a matter of fact, while presenting epistemology papers, very often I don't get much comments. But somehow that has been the experience. So I'm very very happy. Um, so you have given me uh, many comments, and many of them needs a very serious deliberation, I believe. Um, so. First of all, thank you for. Well, I'm glad to hear that you believe that this the idea of testimonial, um the separate faculty for testimony, or the testimonial competence as a separate thing, makes sense. I was not very sure whether I can develop that into any further, and I'm having very less confidence about that. But I'm very glad to hear that you think it's a right thing to explore, because if that can be developed, there's a good answer to the response. So thank you. And regarding your observation that maybe Greco's account is not modest because he's um, stressing on important aspects such as testimonial competence, which are very key to the epistemic agent rather than anybody else. Yeah, I agree that that is true. However, I said that his account is a modest one because he incorporated this notion of pragmatics into his account, that is the requirement of being a reliable source of information, and that is a pragmatic condition and not a pure virtue theoretic account, virtue theoretic aspect. So therefore he's diluting the virtue theoretic project, and from that perspective I said it's modest. But it is true that he is very much a virtue theoretic person because he wants to pin down everything to the testimonial competence of the agent. So that is something I should explore. And regarding the Gettier cases, yes, it's very interesting. And before that, the justification aspect that you mentioned, uh, yes, as we know in traditional epistemology, the three notions that we always stress upon is justification, truth, and belief. So belief is largely a psychological notion, and truth is a metaphysical notion. And we mainly look into the some relate discussions on and related to justification because that's the pure epistemic notion. So now, justification is often construed as a relationship between propositions. Uh, However, virtue epistemology, at least the way they officially declare, is that they want to do the attempt they want to make is not in a propositional way. They want to understand knowledge as a phenomena. So, and the attempt is not to provide a conceptual analysis where you give individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions in terms of propositions. So that's precisely the reason why the term justification has been absent in this discussion. So instead, they want to see how the agent's belief is connected to truth by focusing on something called intellectual virtues, which is a property of an agent rather than a relationship between prepositions. Okay, so that's precisely the reason why the term justification is absent. So regarding the Gettier thing, but still, I think it is illuminating if you look at the Gettier cases and virtue epistemology. For example, uh, see this regarding this testimony case, some people have suggested, for example, Ana Sosa has suggested that maybe this is not a big deal. You can simply say that uh, in cases of testimonial knowledge, the agent is credited partially for sure. Some effort has been exercised by the agent. Therefore, for sure, the agent is partially credited. And you simply say that in cases of testimonial knowledge, partial credit is sufficient credit. End of the problem. So that has been one response. But the criticism to that position is that then how would you respond to Gettier cases? One might say that in Gettier cases, the agent, it's not that the agent just believe anything that comes to their mind. They believe in a very responsible fashion, to use the virtue epistemological locutions, and they have proper evidences for in what they believe. So definitely they deserve, one might say, some credit for the truth of that belief. It's not completely lucky. So one might say, if you invoke this partial credit view for testimonial knowledge, you might fail to rule out Gettier cases. So then there is a problem. So that's why this discussion has been complicated, and this kind of attempts has been made by Greco. But again, I'm sure grappling with Gettier problem is still important to test the force of virtue epistemology, and I continue to do that. But thanks for that suggestion as well. Yeah, so with that, I think I'll stop my response, but I have not responded to everything you said, but I have definitely taken note of it, and I need to continue. I need to think of more about that, particularly the cases such as Miranda Fricker's case that you're referring to. I have not explored in detail. Maybe I should, given the encouragement that you have given me. Maybe I should. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Sreejith. But also feel free to just ignore a lot of this, and
No.
probably just the idea. The idea is just to focus on what the line, the one thread that you are trying to weave in this paper, and then to have that line, but also to, like, I think and probably I'm just trying to. I should not actually, but probably I think the goal that Varun also would have, and the others also who've commented, that this aspect of your presentation can also, I think, can be developed in, let's say, some other paper, if not immediately for the purposes of your current thread.
Sure,
Okay,
sure.
thank you.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I'm just really happy that we did this.
No. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lalita.
Okay, thanks, Lalita. It's nice to meet you after a good long period. So we have almost reached the end of the session. Is there any further questions? We have 10 more minutes left. Okay, in that case, let me ask just one query. It seems that these people from Greco to Sosa, they have a very simplistic idea of crediting, and especially in the context of testimony. Take that Chicago traveler case. We can also assume a situation where a second traveler meets the same person, getting the same kind of information, but fail to reach the destination. That's also possible because he put me there. I am very bad at processing this kind of clues, especially when it comes to navigation. Most certainly, I will fail. So, so it seems that the crediting aspect seems to be, they are taking it very simplistic, either full or partial kind of stuff. I don't know why they take it in that sense. One more stuff I have in mind is from Plato, this road to Larissa example, where somebody wants to go to Larissa, a city, and he talks to a person, source of knowledge. But here the interesting situation is that the source of knowledge who gives the directions has never been to Larissa. But he has some idea where Larissa is and the road to that place. So that person gives information, and the traveler successfully reaches Larissa. So Plato asks, does the traveler has or the source has knowledge? Where source has some knowledge, obviously that helped the traveler reach the destination. But did he or she has in fact knowledge? So I brought this just to complicate the situation. It seems that they are taking very simplistic examples and play with full or partial crediting thing. Maybe if you work out a notion of crediting, it seems quite closer to the idea of merit in political science when we discuss especially a reminder of Michael Sandel's work, The Tyranny of Merit, where we have this absolute idea of merit. So I'm not sure how much we can push this argument, but the notion of credit these people seem to play with is something very akin to the idea of merit that we use when it comes to deciding the application and kind of stuff. Just some observations. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Srinod. Thank you. And yeah, it's true. The notion of credit is very important in this account, and how you construe credit is of great significance as far as the account is concerned. So therefore, one should pay a lot of attention to what it actually means. First, the way it has been construed so far, particularly, let's say, by Ernest Sosa, is that somebody is credited for his success if the success is because of his competence. Now, what exactly that because of clause means, and how much of competence is sufficient competence, etc., are problematic areas. And when saying credit, usually what it means is that it's not necessarily a praise or respect, etc. Rather, it's more very akin to a causal relationship, though it's not completely a causal one. He also introduced a metaphysical aspect, which I will mention in a minute. So he would say, for example, heart can be credited for pumping blood properly. A ship can be credited for withstanding a storm, let's say. So it's also can be extended to inanimate objects. Therefore, it is largely understood in a causal fashion. And but it's not purely causal, because then you will have problem with maybe things like Gettier cases. So what he says is that you're credited for the success if your success manifests your competence. He's introducing a heavy metaphysical notion there, namely success manifests competence. So now what does that mean? He keep it as a primitive. And he says that we all understand cases of success manifests competence, etc. And he explain it with examples. So that's how. Basically, credit and success manifest competition, etc., are kept as a primitive in his account, and he explained with examples and says that we have an intuitive grasp of what it is. So no analysis is really given actually. Okay, so that is the stage it is in, but one should, and I feel that that has problems. Keeping it as a primitive has certain difficulties in understanding or distinguishing certain cases. So that is definitely an area one should look into. Thank you for your suggestion. And another thing that you are mentioning, the Lackey case. See, the Morris has knowledge if his the truth of his belief is because of his competence. He reaching the final destination is only mentioned in the example, but that is not important actually. As long as he has knowledge, as long as his truth of his belief is uh, because of his competence, he has knowledge. Whether he reached there or not, if he is unable to reach there because of his difficulty in processing the information or difficulty in navigating, etc., that wouldn't be really a problem in ascribing knowledge. So that aspect is slightly different. So the Larissa case that you're mentioning, I would imagine that most people would say that in the Larissa case, the testifier is an expert or not will have to be decided and what should be the criteria for that. Also, we would need certain background information, I suppose, that why does this person believe that such and such is the direction? He has not been there, but what is the basis of his belief? If he has proper basis of this belief, I think one can gain knowledge from his testimony. That's my gut feeling. Okay.
Okay, I think that's the end of the discussion. So let me thank Sreejith and
Yeah, before you thank, I think I should thank all of you. I have got a lot of comments to think, and comments and criticisms, more importantly, to think about and to develop further. And honestly speaking, this has been a draft that I prepared, and it's sort of, I was unsure as to what else I should do with this. So now I have got a lot of energy and a lot of comments and criticism, and that should get me going at least at least for a while, I suppose. So thank you very much to all your criticisms, comments, and observations. I will keep all of them in mind, and if needed, maybe I will bother you as well via online, via emails, to see what you think about it, etc. Okay, so thank you very much.
okay, then so let's thank Sreejith and his kid for sparing him on his Saturday morning, and for his wife to make it possible. Sangeeta, thanks. And all of you, thanks once more. So let's wind today's session. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.